The corporate Gulfstream G650 vanished from radar at 3:42 hours, somewhere over the Hindu Kush Mountains between Kabul and Dubai. No mayday, no transponder, just silence where $30 million of airframe and one of the world's wealthiest men should have been. The Joint Operations Center at Bagram went from routine night watch to controlled chaos in 90 seconds. Every available asset scrambled, Predator drones repositioned, satellite feeds redirected, AWACS crews yanked from their coffee breaks. The missing passenger wasn't just wealthy. Viktor Kozlov owned half the rare earth mineral operations funding 3 governments' defense budgets. His disappearance could destabilize markets from London to Singapore before breakfast. Captain Noor Malika was 300 miles south, flying lazy circles over Kandahar province in an A-10 Thunderbolt II that smelled like hydraulic fluid and old sweat. Her wingman had RTB'd an hour ago with a cracked canopy seal. She was alone up there, watching nothing happen to nobody, when the scramble order came through. The controller's voice carried that specific tension that meant someone important was having a very bad day. She banked hard northeast, pushing the throttles forward. The Warthog wasn't built for speed, but she knew how to make it move when it mattered. Ground stations were calling it a probable crash. Weather over the mountains was biblical thunderhead stacked to 40,000 feet, icing conditions, winds that could flip a fighter jet. The Gulfstream's last known position put it in a box of airspace roughly the size of Delaware, all of it vertical terrain and hostile territory. SAR helicopters couldn't launch in these conditions. Fast movers couldn't loiter long enough to search effectively. Satellites saw nothing but clouds, nor checked her fuel. She had maybe 90 minutes before she'd be talking to tankers or heading home on fumes. The A-10's radar was Vietnam-era technology, barely useful for weather avoidance, completely useless for search operations. But she had eyes, and she had spent 6 years flying close air support missions that taught her to see what didn't belong. The radio chatter painted a picture of bureaucratic panic. State Department, CIA, DOD. Everyone wanted updates nobody could provide. Somewhere in that static, she caught fragments about Kozlov's itinerary, his security detail, the diplomatic nightmare already brewing. The storm over the mountains looked like a wall of ink in her HUD, lightning flickering through it like artillery fire. She punched into the weather at 12,000 feet, turbulence slamming her against the harness hard enough to leave bruises. The Warthog shuddered but held course. Somewhere in that darkness, a clock was running out. Flying an A-10 through a thunderstorm over Afghanistan wasn't in anyone's tactical manual. The aircraft was designed for low-altitude tank busting, not high-altitude search and rescue in conditions that grounded everything else with wings. But Noor Malika hadn't earned her call sign by following manuals. Shikari, Hunter Indari came from a mission 2 years back when she'd tracked an HVT convoy through a sandstorm that had every other pilot declaring weather abort. She'd stayed low, used terrain masking, and put a Maverick missile through the lead vehicle's engine block from a profile the Taliban thought impossible. The nickname stuck because it fit. She hunted when others quit. The Ops Center patched her directly to Colonel Reeves, the air operations commander who'd signed off on this insanity. His voice crackled through static. Shikari 2-1, be advised we're working diplomatic channels for Pakistani airspace clearance. Current search box is Grid November Papa 73. Recommend maintain Angels 1-2, Vector 045. Standard procedure. Cover the most likely crash site based on last known trajectory. She rogered up and adjusted course, knowing the recommendation was based on assumptions that could be completely wrong. Planes didn't vanish cleanly. Something had made Kozlov's jet stop talking and start falling. Mechanical failure, possibly. Pilot incapacitation, maybe. Or something worse that nobody wanted to say over unsecured channels. The lightning was closer now, striking peaks that jutted through the cloud deck like broken teeth. Ice was forming on her windscreen faster than the defroster could handle. She dropped to 10,000, trading safety margin for visibility. The terrain below was barely visible through gaps in the weather ridgelines, valleys, nothing that looked like wreckage. Her Martin Baker ejection seat suddenly felt very thin between her and a very long fall. The thought crossed her mind that if she went down out here, they'd add her name to the same search operation. 2 aircraft lost. Efficiency. The radar altimeter screamed as a peak flashed past her right wing, close enough to see individual rocks. She climbed hard, adrenaline sharpening everything. This was exactly how pilots died: pushing weather, pushing terrain, pushing fuel margins until one calculation went wrong. But the alternative was leaving Kozlov and whoever else was on that jet to die slowly in wreckage nobody could find. The tactical radio erupted with crosstalk. Another search aircraft, an Air Force C-130, was declaring weather abort, unable to penetrate the storm system. Navy P-8 out of Diego Garcia was still 3 hours out. She was alone up here with her aging Warthog and a search area the size of Rhode Island. She switched frequencies to guard channel, broadcasting in the blind. Any aircraft, this is Shikari 2-1 on guard, conducting search operations grid November Papa 7-3. If you're receiving this transmission, squawk emergency and activate your beacon. Nothing but static answered. She hadn't expected anything else. Emergency locator transmitters were supposed to activate on impact, but mountains had a way of destroying things too thoroughly for electronics to matter. She banked west, following a valley that cut deeper into the range. The clouds were lower here, forcing her down to 8,000 feet. Dangerously low, tactically stupid. She did it anyway. The fuel gauge was becoming a problem. She'd burned through a quarter of her load just getting here and fighting the weather. The nearest tanker was holding station 200 miles south, waiting for her to call. But every minute spent refueling was a minute not searching. And somewhere down in that darkness, if anyone had survived the initial impact, they were running out of time even faster than she was running out of fuel. She'd seen enough crash sites to know the math. Trauma, exposure, shock. The golden hour wasn't golden up here. It was measured in minutes. Her right engine coughed. Just once. Just enough to spike her heart rate and make her scan the instruments. Oil pressure good. Temperatures normal. Probably just turbulence disrupting airflow. Probably. The A-10 was built to take damage and keep flying, but that durability assumed combat damage, not meteorological abuse at the edge of the aircraft's performance envelope. She was asking the Warthog to do things it was never designed for, in conditions that would have kept more sophisticated aircraft on the ground. But sophistication didn't matter if you weren't flying. Another lightning strike close enough to leave afterimages. Thunder rolled through the cockpit despite the sound insulation. She dropped lower, skimming the valley floor. Trees appeared in her peripheral vision, too close. She climbed 50 feet, compromised between visibility and survival. The search pattern was systematic but increasingly desperate. Grid squares checked and eliminated, fuel burning, weather worsening. The rational part of her brain was already composing the mission report. Search conducted. No contact. Weather abort recommended. She told that part to shut up and kept flying. The tactical frequency crackled. Shikari 2-1 Bagram control. Be advised, Pakistani Air Defense has you on radar. They're requesting you exit their airspace immediately. She glanced at her nav display. She drifted across the border without noticing, too focused on the terrain below. International incident brewing. She acknowledged and adjusted course, but barely. Sovereignty mattered less than finding that jet. The Pakistanis could file a complaint later. She'd RTB before anyone scrambled fighters to intercept her, and by then it would be academic. She checked her fuel again. 40 minutes of search time remaining before she had to leave for the tanker whether she wanted to or not. The radio erupted again. Not Pakistani Air Defense, something else. A transmission so broken by static and interference that she almost missed it. A voice, weak, desperate. Anyone, grid November Papa 7, we are down, cockpit intact. Injury, her pulse jumped. She keyed her mic immediately. Station calling on guard, this is Shikari 2-1, say again your position, how copy? Static swallowed her words. She tried again, slower, louder. Aircraft down, this is Shikari 2-1. Transmit your position. I am conducting search operations your area. Nothing, then fragments. 7-3, Alpha, burning, can't. The transmission died completely. She'd heard enough. Grid November Papa 7-3 Alpha. A 10-kilometer square of mountainous hell but narrower than what she'd been searching. And someone was alive down there. Someone with enough function to transmit, which meant recent crash or survivors holding out. She punched coordinates into her nav system and banked hard toward the new search box. The weather was worse in that direction. Of course it was. Nothing about this was going to be easy. The valley opened into a basin ringed by peaks that disappeared into cloud. Visibility maybe half a mile in the rain and mist. She descended to 6,000 feet, low enough to see details, high enough to maybe avoid a controlled flight into terrain. Her eyes scanned methodically, quadrant by quadrant. Rocks, trees, snow, more rocks, no wreckage, no smoke, no signs of impact. But the transmission had been real. Someone was down here. She just had to find them before fuel or weather, or Pakistani interceptors forced her to leave. Then she saw it. Not wreckage, not smoke. A reflection, brief, metallic, gone before she could be sure she'd seen anything. She circled back, dropping lower. The reflection flashed again, catching sunlight that somehow penetrated the cloud deck at just the right angle. Wing surface. Definitely wing surface. She pressed closer, ignoring every instinct screaming about the terrain. The Gulf Stream was there, tucked into a small plateau maybe 2 kilometers from the nearest navigable road. The fuselage was largely intact, nose down at a steep angle. One engine was missing completely. The other showed signs of fire damage, but the passenger compartment looked survivable. Maybe. She keyed her radio to all tactical frequencies simultaneously. Bagram Control, Shikari 2-1. I have located the missing Gulf Stream. Grid November Papa 7-3 Alpha 5. Aircraft appears intact with possible survivors. Requesting immediate SAR package this location. The response was immediate and predictable. Shikari 2-1, SAR is unable to launch in current weather. Estimate 4 hours minimum before conditions improve. 4 hours. She looked at her fuel gauge. 20 minutes before she had to leave for the tanker. Maybe 45 if she wanted to risk flaming out on approach to Bagram. 4 hours was a death sentence for anyone injured down there. She descended lower, orbiting the crash site. Movement caught her eye. Someone near the wreckage waving something white. Alive. Definitely alive. She rocked her wings in acknowledgement, a gesture that felt absurdly inadequate. Then she did the math that every close air support pilot dreads. She could mark the position, RTB for fuel, and hope the survivors lasted until SAR could launch. Or she could stay, burn her remaining gas maintaining situational awareness, and pray she had enough left to make it to the tanker. Neither option was good. Both involved people dying if she guessed wrong. She chose option 3, the one that wasn't in the manual. She climbed to 10,000 feet, switched to the emergency SAR frequency, and started calling assets. Any helicopter, this is Shikari 2-1 on guard. I have survivors down in Grid November Papa 7-3 Alpha 5. Weather is marginal but penetrable. If you can fly, I can talk you in. The response was silence. Then, unexpectedly, a voice with a thick southern drawl. Shikari, this is Dustoff 3-7. We're a medevac bird out of Salerno. We were told weather abort. She checked her nav display. Salerno was southeast, maybe 60 miles, close enough. Dustoff 3-7, this is Shikari 2-1. The weather is bad but flyable if you stay low. I will escort you inbound and provide navigation. How copy? A pause. She could almost hear the crew chief and pilots conferring, weighing risk against mission. Then, Shikari 2-1, Dustoff 3-7 is launching. Give us 10 minutes to get airborne and we'll be headed your way. She felt something loosen in her chest. 10 minutes. She had 10 minutes of fuel to give them, maybe 15 if she flew like her life depended on it, which it did. The helicopter appeared on schedule, a A-60 Black Hawk punching through the weather at 5,000 feet. She descended to meet them, taking position on their left wing. Dustoff 3-7, Shikari 2-1 has you visual. Follow me in. Terrain rises to 8,000 in this area. Recommend maintain Angels 5 until I call the descent. The helicopter pilot acknowledged, professional and calm despite flying into conditions that had grounded more capable aircraft. She led them into the basin, calling out peaks and obstacles, narrating the approach like a combat landing. Terrain left, 200 feet. Valley narrows ahead. Target is 12 o'clock, 3 miles, plateau at 6,000 feet. The clouds were lower now, squeezing them against the mountains. She could see the helicopter struggling with turbulence, the pilots fighting to maintain formation. She slowed her airspeed to just above stall, hanging on the edge of controlled flight to keep from leaving them behind. The Gulf Stream appeared through the mist. She marked it with a low pass, wings rocking to show the helicopter crew exactly where to land. The Black Hawk descended toward the plateau, rotor wash blasting snow and debris into the air. She orbited overhead, watching the approach, ready to call abort if the landing looked impossible. But the pilots were good. They settled onto the uneven ground with barely a bounce, rotors still turning. She had 8 minutes of fuel remaining, not enough to make it to the tanker, maybe enough to make it to Bagram if she flew direct and the winds were favorable. She climbed away from the plateau, giving the medevac crew room to work. The tactical radio came alive with updates. 6 survivors extracted, 3 critical. Viktor Kozlov was among them, unconscious but alive. The helicopter lifted off 3 minutes later, climbing hard for Salerno and the surgical team waiting there. She formed up on their wing again, escorting them out of the mountains. The weather was clearing slightly, visibility improving to maybe a mile. Small mercies. The fuel warning light illuminated. 5 minutes remaining. She broke formation, banking south toward Bagram. The Black Hawk pilot keyed his mic. Shikari 2-1, Dustoff 3-7. We wouldn't have found them without you. Thank you. She acknowledged briefly, too busy calculating fuel burns and glide ratios to appreciate the sentiment. The Warthog was flying on fumes now, both engines showing fuel flow rates that were academic exercises in optimism. The runway at Bagram appeared through the clouds. She declared emergency fuel, got immediate clearance, and descended on a long straightened approach that conserved every drop. The left engine quit at 200 feet. The right followed at 100. She glided the final distance in silence, 30,000 pounds of titanium bathtub falling toward concrete. The main gear kissed the runway with surprising gentleness. The nosewheel followed. She coasted to a stop halfway down the runway, engines dead, hydraulics groaning. The tower was already dispatching a tow truck. She sat in the cockpit for a moment, hands still on the controls, waiting for the adrenaline to subside enough that she could trust her legs. Through the canopy, she could see the recovery crew approaching. Behind them, dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the sky colors that didn't seem real after the night she'd just flown. The debrief took 3 hours. Operations officer, squadron commander, intelligence. Everyone wanted details about the crash site, the survivors, the weather. She answered questions with tactical precision, keeping emotions out of it. Yes, she'd exceeded her fuel reserve. Yes, she'd violated Pakistani airspace. Yes, she'd made calls that weren't strictly within her authority. She'd also saved 6 lives, including one that several governments considered strategically critical. The squadron commander listened without expression, then dismissed everyone except Noor. She waited for the reprimand. It didn't come. Instead, he handed her a tablet showing a message from CENTCOM command. Kozlov had regained consciousness at Salerno. His first question was who found him. His second was how to send a thank you letter. The story spread through the Air Force faster than classified information had any right to. The captain who flew an A-10 through weather that grounded everyone else, who burned her tanks dry finding a needle in a mountainous haystack, who escorted a helicopter into conditions that violated every safety regulation. Some versions were more accurate than others. She didn't correct them. By the time she walked into the chow hall 2 days later, pilots from 3 different squadrons wanted to buy her breakfast. She declined politely and ate alone, same as always. The attention was uncomfortable. The mission was over. That should have been the end of it. Viktor Kozlov had other ideas. 2 weeks later, she was summoned to Bagram's VIP terminal, a prefab building that pretended to be nicer than it was. Kozlov was there, arm in a sling, face still showing bruises from the crash. He wanted to meet the pilot who'd saved his life. She stood at attention while he thanked her in accented English, his security detail watching from a respectful distance. He tried to give her a watch that probably cost more than she made in a year. She refused. He seemed surprised, then amused. "Most people accept gifts," he said. She told him she was just doing her job. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Captain Malika, if you ever need anything at all, you contact me." He handed her a business card with a private number. She took it to be polite, knowing she'd never use it. The Taliban didn't care about diplomatic niceties or billionaire gratitude. They cared that an A-10 had been operating in their territory, alone and vulnerable. 3 weeks after the rescue, intelligence intercepted chatter about a specific American pilot. A woman, flying a warthog, call sign Shikari. They wanted her specifically. Wanted to prove that American technology and American arrogance could both be shot down over the mountains where empires went to die. The threat assessment landed on her squadron commander's desk with a recommendation to rotate her stateside for 60 days until the attention died down. She refused. Rotating out meant someone else flew her missions. Someone else provided close air support to troops who needed it. That wasn't acceptable. So they changed her tactics instead. No more solo patrols. No more extended loiters over hostile territory. She flew with wingmen, stayed within SAR range, followed rules she'd been bending for years. It felt like flying in shackles. The troops on the ground didn't understand why their favorite CAS bird suddenly came with restrictions. She couldn't explain without making it worse. The war continued. She flew her modified missions, hating every compromise, knowing that prudence was keeping her alive but wondering if survival was worth it if it meant doing half the job. The wedding invitation arrived 4 months later, forwarded through official channels because Kozlov's people had tracked down her unit. He was marrying his longtime partner in Dubai. He wanted her there. Wanted to introduce her to people who mattered, people who could advance her career or offer opportunities after the Air Force. She filed the invitation in the trash and didn't think about it again. Her career didn't need advancement from civilians who thought military service was exotic. Her opportunities after the Air Force didn't exist yet because she hadn't decided when after would be. Some pilots counted days until separation. She counted missions until there weren't any left to fly. The mountains kept killing pilots who didn't respect them. An F-16 from Aviano went down in similar weather 6 months later. The pilot ejected but landed in Taliban territory. Shikari was on CAP 50 miles away when the call came. The same storm system, the same impossible conditions. But this time she had a wingman, and they developed tactics for exactly this scenario. They went in low, using the valleys, communicating by brief radio calls that sketched out a search pattern. The F-16 pilot's beacon was transmitting, which made everything easier. They found him within 20 minutes, then held overhead while a CSAR team fought through the weather to pull him out. No heroics this time, just professional execution of a difficult mission. The F-16 pilot bought her a beer at the club later. She drank half and left early. The pattern repeated. Difficult missions, whether other pilots avoided. She developed a reputation as the one who flew when conditions were marginal, who found people when they were lost, who stayed when others left. The reputation wasn't entirely accurate. She aborted missions when safety margins disappeared, declined impossible tasks, followed rules more often than the stories suggested. But reputations had their own momentum, especially when they aligned with what people wanted to believe. The Air Force loved stories about exceptional pilots doing exceptional things. She hated being a story, but she loved flying missions nobody else could, so she accepted the trade-off. 3 years after the Kozlov rescue, she was promoted to major. The ceremony was brief, attended by squadron mates and a 1-star general who'd flown warthogs in Desert Storm. He pinned on her new rank and told her she reminded him of pilots from his generation, back when the mission mattered more than the politics. She thanked him and meant it. The politics of modern military aviation frustrated her risk aversion, careerism, the slow bureaucratic calculus that measured success in metrics instead of missions. She understood the reasons. The military couldn't afford to lose pilots to preventable accidents. But understanding didn't make it less frustrating when good pilots stayed on the ground because paperwork said weather was marginal. The Taliban finally got their chance 2 months later. A lucky shot from a DSHK heavy machine gun during a low-level gun run, punching through the A-10's legendary armor into a hydraulic line. She felt the controls go mushy, saw fluid pressure dropping, knew immediately she was in serious trouble. The ejection decision calculus ran through her mind in seconds. Over hostile territory, 10 miles from friendly lines, badly damaged aircraft that might or might not respond to controls. She could punch out, risk capture, hope CSAR got to her before the Taliban did. Or she could nurse the crippled Warthog home on backup hydraulics and prayer. She chose prayer. The Warthog limped toward Bagram at 200 knots, slowly losing altitude despite her best efforts. The tower cleared emergency equipment to the runway. Her wingman formed up tight on her wing, calling out altitude and airspeed because her instruments were intermittent. She focused on keeping the stick centered, making tiny corrections, conserving whatever hydraulic pressure remained in the backup system. The airfield appeared ahead. She configured for landing despite the manual's warning that lowering gear with compromised hydraulics could jam the whole system. The gear came down. Locked. Small miracle in a day of problems. The landing was controlled violence, too fast and too hard but survivable. The aircraft rolled straight for maybe 300 feet before the damaged hydraulics finally quit completely. The Warthog ground looped off the runway into the dirt, spinning through 180 degrees before stopping in a cloud of dust and jet fuel vapor. She shut down everything still running and sat very still, waiting to see if anything would explode. Nothing did. The rescue crews converged on the aircraft. She climbed out under her own power, waved off the medics, walked directly to the debriefing room. The maintenance officer met her there with photos of the damage. The DSHK round had missed her by maybe 18 inches. Any closer and they'd be scraping her out of the cockpit instead of writing up repair estimates. The close call should have been a warning to slow down, take fewer risks, accept that luck eventually runs out. Instead, it reinforced what she already knew. The A-10 was built to absorb punishment and keep flying. So was she. They repaired her aircraft in 3 weeks. She was back on the flight schedule the next day, flying someone else's Warthog while hers was rebuilt. The squadron doc cleared her after a pro forma conversation about stress and combat fatigue. She assured him she was fine. She was lying, but not the way he thought. The problem wasn't trauma from the shoot-down. The problem was that she'd felt more alive in those 10 minutes of emergency flying than in the previous 10 months of routine missions. The pattern couldn't last forever. The Air Force was drawing down operations in Afghanistan, consolidating bases, sending pilots home or reassigning them to other theaters. Her squadron received orders to redeploy to Al-Udeid, cleaner, safer, further from the missions that mattered. She could have stayed in theater by requesting assignment to one of the remaining squadrons. She didn't. The war was ending, at least America's version of it. Time to accept that and move on. She packed her gear, said goodbye to mountains that had tried to kill her more times than she could count, and flew commercial to Qatar like a normal person instead of a warrior. Al-Udeid was a different war, air-conditioned, bureaucratic. The missions were real but felt abstract, supporting operations in Syria and Iraq from comfortable distance. She flew her hours, attended her briefings, and felt herself slowly suffocating under the weight of normalcy. Other pilots seemed content with the change. She wasn't wired for content. The squadron commander noticed. He called her into his office for a conversation that started professionally and ended personally. He'd read her record. He knew what she'd done in Afghanistan. He also knew she was burning out in an environment that didn't demand everything she had to give. He suggested she consider a move to the weapons school, become an instructor, teach the next generation. She said she'd think about it. She didn't think about it. The decision made itself 6 months later during a routine training mission over Iraqi desert. Engine failure at 20,000 feet, the kind of emergency that should have been manageable. Except her wingman panicked, broke formation, nearly collided with her during the descent. She talked him through it over the radio, got both aircraft safely on the ground at a divert field, completed the emergency with such calm professionalism that the tower controller commented on it during the debrief. And she realized, sitting in that debriefing room, that she was done. Not with flying, not with the Air Force, but done with missions that didn't push her, environments that didn't test her, flying that felt like going through motions instead of accomplishing something vital. She applied to the weapons school the next week. The application process was rigorous recommendations, records review, interview with a board of senior pilots who asked questions designed to expose weakness or arrogance. She answered honestly. Yes, she'd taken risks. Yes, some had been calculated and some had been desperate. Yes, she'd broken rules and survived by skill as much as luck. But she'd also saved lives, completed impossible missions, and never lost a wingman or failed to bring an aircraft home when physics allowed it. The board accepted her. She started the course 3 months later, immediately regretting every moment of confidence during the interview. Weapons school broke pilots. That was the point. Take competent aviators and rebuild them as experts in their weapons system, tacticians who understood not just how to fly but why to fly specific profiles in specific conditions. The academics were brutal. The flying was worse. Every mission was graded, every mistake documented, every assumption challenged by instructors who'd forgotten more about the A-10 than most pilots would ever learn. She struggled at first, her instincts and experience sometimes working against her when the school demanded precision over improvisation. But she adapted, always adapted. That was her talent. By graduation, she'd earned academic honors and the quiet respect of instructors who didn't give respect easily. Her next assignment sent her to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, home of the A-10 fleet, as a flight instructor in the formal training unit, teaching new pilots to fly the Warthog. Some arrived fresh from basic flight training, overwhelmed by everything. Others came from different aircraft, convinced their previous experience made them natural hog drivers. Both types needed to be rebuilt. She approached instruction the same way she approached combat missions: figure out what the situation required, execute with precision, accept nothing less than competence. Her students feared her. Her fellow instructors respected her. The squadron commander appreciated her because student pass rates improved and safety incidents decreased. But teaching wasn't flying missions. It was preparation for missions someone else would fly. And after 2 years at Davis-Monthan, she could feel herself becoming exactly what she'd tried to avoid, a professional pilot who'd lost touch with why she'd wanted to fly in the first place. The Air Force offered her a path to command. Squadron operations officer, then maybe executive officer, eventually a squadron command of her own. It was a good career, a successful career. She submitted her resignation instead. 12 years of service, countless missions, a handful of medals, and a growing certainty that military aviation's future didn't include the kind of flying she needed to keep doing. The Air Force tried to retain her, offered incentives, pointed to her record. She thanked them and left anyway. Civilian life was disorienting. No flight schedule, no mission briefs, no purpose beyond whatever she decided purpose should be. She spent 3 months doing nothing in particular, living off savings, wondering if she'd made a catastrophic mistake. The answer arrived via email from an address she didn't recognize. Viktor Kozlov, still alive, still remembering. His company was establishing a private aerial firefighting operation, contracting with Western states to provide rapid response during fire season. He needed pilots who could fly in bad conditions, make quick decisions, and handle aircraft that weren't built for what they'd be asked to do. He wanted her to run flight operations. She read the email twice, deleted it, then undeleted it an hour later and wrote back asking for details. The work was different but familiar. Low-altitude operations in dangerous conditions, smoke instead of enemy fire, forest fires instead of insurgents, but the same requirement to fly precisely when everything was trying to kill you. The aircraft were retrofitted C-130s carrying fire retardant, not weapons. The mission started at dawn and ended when darkness or fuel made continuing suicidal. She hired pilots carefully, veterans mostly, people who understood risk management and decision-making under pressure. They flew hard for 6 months during fire season, then spent the off-season training and maintaining equipment. It was exhausting and dangerous and exactly what she needed. The mountains were still trying to kill her. Now she was fighting back with water instead of weapons. 3 years into the civilian job, the call came that brought everything full circle. Forest fire in the Hindu Kush Mountains, started by lightning, threatening a village too remote for ground crews to reach in time. The Afghan government requested international assistance. Kozlov's company deployed assets. She flew the lead aircraft into the same mountains where she'd found him years before, orbiting above burning forest instead of wreckage, dropping retardant loads with precision that came from muscle memory and countless hours over similar terrain. The village survived. She didn't think about irony or poetry. She thought about fuel loads and wind direction and the next pass. The tribal elders wanted to thank her personally. She declined through interpreters. But later, sitting in the C-130 while her crew loaded for the next mission, she looked out at the mountains, the same peaks that had tried to kill her, the same valleys where she'd hunted for Kozlov's jet on fumes and faith, the same sky that had tested her and nearly beaten her more times than anyone should survive. And she understood, finally, what her call sign had really meant. Not just hunter, but something that returns to the same territory despite the danger, because that's where the prey is, where the mission is, where everything that matters happens. She closed the cargo door and got back to work.